are live. All right. Hey, look, I even got sound. Woo. Welcome everybody to
Not church in space.
right, whatever live Q&A. Pastor and the Recovering Heretic, our live Q&A show. I am Pastor Dave, the pastor here at RELC, and with me is
Your recovering heretic, Dan.
Dan. You need like they used to call head heretics Hesiarchs, you know, so that can be
Cool.
that can be
Okay,
your
yeah, I want a
title.
badge that says Hesiarch.
Hesiarch, yeah.
Okay,
That
official.
could be your official title.
I'm looking that up so I can spell it right.
Right.
Yeah, it's been a while.
It's been a while, 3
So
weeks.
let's get to it. Part of it is I want this to be a potpourri thing,
Okay.
just because it has been a while,
Uh-huh.
instead of just going off one particular reading or whatever.
Yeah.
And people can ask lots of questions.
I did get a question beforehand, though, before we start.
Oh, okay.
So this is a question from Karen Harvey. She specially emailed me this question.
Okay.
And her question was, did Martin Luther intend to start a new church? Was her question. It was a good question.
Yeah, it's a very good question.
So the answer, Karen, wherever you are, if you watch this later, the answer, Karen, is that no, he did not intend to start a new church. His actual goal, Martin Luther believed his whole life he was a faithful Catholic, right up until the end.
Just like Henry VIII.
Just like,
regard.
right, yeah, similar. He never intended to start his own church. And ever since then, the Lutheran version of history has gone that you kicked us out. We didn't leave.
Okay.
You know, we would have gladly stayed, but if our conditions had been met, basically. But we were kicked out instead of the conditions being met for reform.
Yeah.
And so no, he did not intend to start his own church, Karen, which is a good question.
Now, was he, once the Reformation got rolling,
Uh-huh.
all right, it starts with Luther,
Yeah.
but you end up getting all these other people that join in and start their own
Right.
denominations. Did they have the same feeling as Luther, that they were waiting for the church to reform and it wouldn't, or were they just chomping at the bit to actually start a new religion?
Depends on who.
Okay.
You know, so like Zwingli, the early reform, the first generation reformers are kind of with Luther. They're intending to reform. They're not intending to start something new.
So the label is very accurate.
Yeah.
Reform.
Yeah, Reformation, right? You know, and so they wanted the first generation. So that's like Luther and Zwingli. You know, Zwingli. It's a great name. Zwingli's in Switzerland. It's in Geneva.
Yeah.
You know, and so
he leads up to the Anabaptists, right? And then the Amish
well,
and all that end up stemming
they
from
kind of
them.
merge. It's a separate stream, the Swiss Reformation, and then so those guys don't intend on starting their own churches. They end up getting kicked out, and then then there's what we call the Anabaptists, which they're sometimes called the radical reformers. You know, and they're interested in a lot more than just they want to change everything. Not just the theology, you know. And so I don't know whether they thought about it that way, but they really, the course of their reforms was really starting something new. Not a new religion, but they kind of thought about it as getting back to the early church, the Acts church.
Yeah.
That's how they thought about it. And that's where we get Anabaptists and Mennonites, and they're all out of that stream. So it's a different, we call it the Magisterial Reformation and the Radical Reformation.
Gotcha.
Magisterial because the Luther and Zwingli, they're backed up by the magistrates, the dukes and those people. You know, that's who's backing their reform, and the radical reformers are populists, basically. And they don't get along very well.
Well, and it seems one of the other big differences is there's not a serious lifestyle change with the magisterial reformers, but the Anabaptists, the radical reformers.
Yeah, they wanted something.
Yeah, you're actually changing how you live your life.
Right, and how church operates. And yeah, Luther always said he didn't want to change the Mass itself. He wanted to change the theology behind the Mass, you know, which is why to this day, a Lutheran service looks very Catholic. You know, it's because we didn't object to the liturgy. We just objected to the theology behind the liturgy, you know, and we've thought a lot of was worth keeping, you know. So yeah, that's where that goes.
Okay. Now, before I get to my stuff, does our duo of live studio audience have any questions at this point?
Mm. Yep. Mhm. Today we get Mennonites. Amish also come out of that stream. Yeah, so that's kind of the uh, uh, yeah, Mennonites, Amish are the kind of continuation of that stream in this country. Um,
Mhm.
they're also kind of, some of them are kind of like proto Pentecostals. They're not full on Pentecostals yet. That doesn't
Mhm.
start for a while, but you can start to see some similar things there.
Coming up.
But yeah.
What about the Pilgrims? What were they? Were they part of the Anabaptist tradition?
So they're Calvinists. They're hardcore Calvinists.
Okay.
They're strict Calvinists.
And where does Calvinism come
So
from? That.
Calvin's what we call a second generation reformer. He's uh, Luther's not quite dead, but he's late in his life by the time Calvin pops on the scene.
Mhm.
And so by the time Calvin shows up, like the divisions are set. Like there are Protestants and there are Catholics.
Mhm.
Period. And so like Calvin almost doesn't work in this scheme because he ends up starting his own stream of thought, Calvinism, but
Mhm.
they're by that point they were different churches. That had been settled. Like
Okay.
they were different churches. And so the question was, are you Catholic or Protestant? That's really the big question. So the Puritans are English Calvinists, and they hated the Church of England because it was too Catholic. It was kind of their basic theory.
Mhm.
It was too Catholic and too in bed with the crown. It was kind of their two big objections.
Yeah.
So there's two different sides. There's two different solutions to that problem. The Puritan solution of that problem was to get up and leave the continent. We'll build something new in America.
And that's why Massachusetts was supposed to be a theocracy.
Right, and that's why Massachusetts started as a theocracy, right? And Massachusetts was, Jonathan Winthrop's the governor, and he says we're building, will be a shining city on a hill. This is his city on a hill speech, right?
Mhm.
And he gives this great sermon, and it's about we're building a city on a hill in this new world. The other solution was the English Civil War, which was fought largely between Puritans who stayed in England and supporters of the king.
Mm.
And eventually, the Puritans win at first, but then the crown comes back, and they kind of all decide to live and let live, in England. Okay. And then the rest of them get up. The people who don't like that solution get up and move to America, and that's where we get Puritans and stuff like that.
Yeah. So, and this may not be a religious question, but why did the theocracy fall in Massachusetts?
It's very hard to maintain a community's radical devotion past the first generation. There's a group of people, right, who are really into this, right? I mean, they literally got up and crossed an ocean of 1,000 leagues, and then to a place where there was no civilization and said, yeah, sure, we'll live. And Massachusetts, they didn't mean to live in Massachusetts. Like they arrived there by accident.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, a storm blew them off course. And I don't know if you know this about Massachusetts. It's not the most habitable place on earth. You've got storms. There's not a lot of fertile growing ground. You got to fish to get food. Like it's not. So we'll go to this middle of nowhere plate. It's like saying we'll build a colony on the moon. Like it's. And so there's a certain group of people who are very devoted to that. But it's kind of like churches. If you have a mission start, our church that rents from us down the hall, right? They experience this, right? You've got the mission start core group who are very fervent, but then figuring out how to continue your community is about, well, you get new people, you get, you get your kids, and they're not quite as fervent as you, but, and so you have to figure out how to adjust, and the theocracy just didn't work with that, without that kind of fervor.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, it seems like Jefferson's quote about every person is a religion of one would kind of apply to that too. Everybody's going to interpret religion a little bit differently.
well, right. I mean, again, when people start moving to Boston because there's a shipping industry there, not just because you're a fanatical Puritan. And what do you do? And then people leave Boston because this is why Rhode Island is founded, is because they didn't quite agree with the men running Boston. And so they went and lived in Rhode Island. And so you get, it's hard to maintain that fervent devotion. You just, it's true in every community. You see it in the Bible too, right? I mean, the Acts community has a particular way of living, right? They hold all things in common, right? That's not how we live,
Right.
And that's not a judgment on us, nor is it a judgment on them. It's just time makes communities change, and become and act differently, become more institutionalized.
Yeah. Well, and that brings us right to the lead question that I had. Jesus is pretty clear in this sermon. I mean, he's let's get rid of Jesus's view.
Sell all your
Sell
possessions.
all your possessions. If you do not give up all your possessions, you cannot follow me. And that's pretty clear cut. There's nothing parable or metaphor in there.
No.
So what happened? As you said, like in Acts, they're taking Jesus's view seriously.
Yeah.
So why? And it's not like he doesn't bring this up in other places. This is just some standalone. He does kind of harp on this gospel after gospel after gospel. So if it's so important to him and so important to the original apostles,
why isn't it?
Yeah, why did we stop? And
I don't know that we. So I guess I don't know that we stopped. I think how it's carried out is slightly different.
Okay.
But my previous church, the church, they started building the church in 1928. The year before the Great Depression starts. And in 1932, members of that church took out second mortgages on their houses to give to the church to help finish building it. In the middle of the Great Depression, like people cashed in their life insurance policies, and wow. And so I would say that it happens differently, and there's been, I could go on about other ways people sacrificially give, even though it hurts them, and I think people in this congregation have experienced that, people have sacrificially given. So I think it does happen, right? But that doesn't, there's a harshness to what Jesus says, and I guess my only response to that is partially that first, the Acts community isn't the only community. And even amongst Jesus's disciples, there's people at various degrees, right? So yes, he says this, but Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus are both Pharisees and leaders, and they're still counted as disciples. Yeah. Right.
And they always have monetary means.
Right. They are obviously wealthy and powerful people, and the book of Acts describes how the city treasurer is a member of the church, in Corinth, and so what Jesus is trying to get you to understand using harsh language is there's no excuse, you can't go to God and then say it was inconvenient.
Yeah.
Like
kind of tying into your sermon today.
Yeah, like there's no excuse for that, right? Now, and you got to remember Lutheran law gospel, right? So this is law, right? And it's meant to drive you to the solution that, well, this is why Christ dies for you, is because, there's this harsh thing where you realize, yeah, I am incomplete, but it is meant to tell you, right, you get like it was inconvenient or it didn't financially work will not be suitable answers at final judgment, It doesn't mean you're going to hell. It just means that final judgment, like, we're all going to have to own up to those places.
Yeah.
We have this woman who calls the office it's probably every day. And she's asking for gift cards. We have $25 gift cards for people in need, but I got to bring them to her because she can't get access to her mailbox for various reasons. And okay, so it's all the way up on Fifth Avenue. It's a half-hour trip.
Yeah.
like to get down to her place. And I usually try and go about once every other week. Because if I go, it's a full. It's like my whole afternoon is shot.
Yeah.
And that's good that I go. I'm glad I go. But there's two things. I had a colleague once ask me, why do you spend all that time going? And I'll be like, well, because following from this reading, I don't think, Jesus, I didn't have time for the 20 minutes for the woman who wants $25 in gift cards will be a suitable excuse. It won't work. At the same time, I also don't think it'll be a particular merit in my cap and my feather, that, I went every other week to the woman who needed and dropped off a bag of groceries and $25, every other week to the woman who needs it. Like, Jesus, even though she called every day, I don't think Jesus is going to be like, yay, gold star for you on that one, and I don't go every week because I got a full-time job and,
Yeah.
right. Like I get why there's valid reasons why I don't, but the harshness remains with Jesus and you just got to accept that,
Well, right up to the point of counting family as a
Yep.
possession.
Yep.
Even give up on your mother, your father,
Mm-hmm.
your sisters, brothers, cousins, whatever.
Yep.
And not only does it seem pretty radical to me that he includes family as a possession, and I'd like to know why he does that, but also that seems to be in direct contradiction with one of the 10 Commandments.
Yeah.
Honor your mother and father.
Right.
So what is he really saying here with that?
St. Augustine says sin is disordered love, or misordered love, is kind of what he says. And so it's not that loving your family is bad, but loving your family more than God is bad, not because your family's bad, but because there's an order of things, right? Yes, there's the fourth commandment is love honor your father and mother.
Yeah.
But there's 3 other ones before that, and they come in that order for a reason, and the first one starts with God, right?
Yeah.
And so, like it's, we're usually getting ourselves into trouble when we're loving something more than it really deserves. That goes for almost anything, right? Like,
Money.
so money,
Yeah.
right? So family can be an idol for some people, that family becomes more important than other things.
Yeah.
There was this story that was going around the internet about this woman who took this vacation with her 2 kids to New York, and she got incredibly mad because there was a guy who was mentally ill who was dancing with pigeons, and her kids saw it. And she said, all these wonderful experiences, the one thing my kids are going to remember is the guy dancing with pigeons.
It seems like a pretty cool thing to remember.
Well, okay, yeah, that's my thing, right? Everybody's like, yeah, I would love that, right? But that's a case of misordered love, or disordered love, for her. That, yeah, you should love your kids and you should want to spend your experiences, but your love of your kids shouldn't come at the expense of, the mentally ill guy in Central Park, who's dancing with pigeons, right? Like, and so most of our sin is, Augustine's right on that most of our sin is that way, that it's loving something out of its proper order. Love of country can go this way too. You should love your country and we should give thanks for it, but loving it more than, the other things that should come above it is when it gets to be a problem, right? And or the silly example, right? Loving Ohio State or Notre Dame football, super high, more than, other things, right?
Yeah.
Like that's that's when it gets to be a problem.
Yeah.
And so it's
Well,
not
we've
that,
brought that up on Church in Space.
right. We've brought that up on our podcast, right? And so it's not that what
In 3D.
in 3D. Yeah. So it's not that any of these things are wrong. We should love our country. We should love our families.
Yeah.
We should love our communities. But loving them out of order, we should love our children.
Mhm.
But loving them out of the order that they're meant to come in is kind of the problem.
Gotcha. Well, Steve has a question
Mm-hmm.
that I suspect has been bugging him for a long time.
Uh-huh.
He wonders, were demons sometimes considered the minor gods of old times? So the old pantheons,
Mm-hmm.
did Judaism, monotheism, start
Yeah.
labeling what were legitimately old gods
Yeah.
as demons?
As demons. There's
And Baal comes to mind, because wasn't
Yeah.
Baal actually a Canaanite god? Or?
Yep. So that's one. There's two different schools of thought on that. And you'll find it dating all the way back to the earliest part of the church.
Mhm.
There's the one school of thought, which is kind of what Paul writes about when he writes about um, should we eat meat sacrificed to idols? Paul's like, well, they're idols. They don't really count for anything. So it's actually not doing anybody harm. But some people are offended by that, so you should probably avoid it. And so Paul represents this that's pretty common in the ancient church, which is they're not demonic, they're just stone, and you're being silly for worshiping Zeus or Baal, because like all you're doing is worshiping a meaningless statue. Like it's nothing.
Yeah.
The other school of thought is not only are they real, they're actually demons that have deceived humanity. And Tertullian's of that view. There's some very strict church fathers that are of that view. And
Yeah.
so kind of waffle back and forth between the two. I usually end up more on the Paul. They're meaningless idols,
Yeah.
and it's just silly, but heed the caution, I guess, from the stricter ones, So some early Christians did say that, yes. Not all, but some. Yep.
And we're typically like in the Old Testament when they mention.
The Old Testament shifts in thinking. It starts off kind of thinking about they're all real and Yahweh is the one in charge of them all.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the Egyptians are oppressing the Israelites in slavery, there's this divine thing going on where the Egyptian gods are out of whack. They're out of place. Because
they're actual gods.
Right, they're actual gods and they're out of place.
Okay.
They're Pharaoh's out of place. Like he's forgotten his ranking. And are in rebellion to Yahweh. Israel's God. And so that's what the plagues are about. Is about literally God bringing back his rebellious servants in the line.
Yeah.
By the time you get to Isaiah, they've kind of shifted more towards it's meaningless statues, don't worry about it kind of thing.
Yeah.
So there's a development of thought there.
Well, how did we get what appear to be so many mythologies about demons? We have what we think demons look like, what they behave like, all these names, but then when you actually look at the Bible, that's not there.
No. It makes a good, I don't really know where it all comes from. It makes a good story. It makes a good story. To be clear, I think demons are real and all that 9 yards. But yeah, there's remarkably little information on them. And kind of like I've said before, C.S. Lewis's words of advice are there's two mistakes you can make with devils. One is to believe they don't exist, and one is to be far too concerned with them. And so wisdom lies in kind of saying they exist, but Jesus has got me, so I'm all right. And that's where true action is.
Back to the Doobie Brothers song.
Yeah, Jesus is just all right.
Going back to today's gospel reading,
Mm-hmm.
it seems to be in conflict what he says there at the beginning of the reading, not the part about giving up all your possessions, but at the beginning, he's talking about you got to plan stuff out, people. If you don't plan, it's not going to go well.
Yeah.
But earlier, his instructions to his disciples is to just go with the flow of things and not prepare. Just trust that
He wants
everything's going to happen for you.
Well, yeah, the planning out is about you knowing what the cost. Don't think following Jesus is easy is kind of the point. Yeah, like he wants you to you should know if you're going to pick up this road, it involves a cross. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a Lutheran pastor in World War II, and he wrote, "When Jesus calls a man, he bids him come and die." And so he wants you to know there is a cost. I'm being upfront with you. I don't want you to say, you never warned me when you get into this life.
Yeah.
And it's hard. It's going to be hard. It's going to require you giving up something. It's going to require a cross, just so you know.
Yeah.
Here are it's like the service terms and conditions when you download something, right? You click, I understand.
Yeah.
Right. That's what he's doing. It's the, I understand.
Yeah, it's reading the end user license agreement to
Yeah.
Christianity.
Right.
Well, I think Paul's the one who coined being a Christian as following the way.
Yeah, it's Acts.
It's Acts, okay.
Yeah,
but we've got, it's referred to, and that kind of, how does grace play into the way? Because the way implies there's a certain way you live your life. But then grace kind of exonerates you from having to follow that path of changing how you live your life.
Well, no, because
this may be our BTQ today, but
so classic Lutheranism, right, is there's law and there's gospel. And law convinces you that you have sinned, right? So the law for we read Deuteronomy 30, or we read Jesus saying, you must sell your possessions. And the conclusion to law should not be, I need to try harder. The conclusion to law is, crap, I really messed up and I can't get myself out of the hole I've dug. I've dug this huge hole for myself. I haven't done any of these things. I haven't chosen life, to use Deuteronomy. And then, so that's law. And then what that is supposed to do is that drives you to Christ, says Luther. So Christ comes with and drives you to the cross, right? That your sins are freely forgiven. The fact that you haven't done it is okay because God picks you up by the scruff of your neck and gets you out of that hole, right? But then the next part is so that, right? And it's so that the Holy Spirit can work in you that which you couldn't do yourself. Does that make sense? And so it's not that you get off, it's actually the opposite. God picks you up at scruff of your neck and then possesses you with the Holy Spirit to get you where he needs to get you to go,
Yeah.
And so for all of us, my friend used to describe this as that feeling of you do something and it's good that you did it, but you're like, where did that come from? I'm not that kind of person.
Yeah.
And that's the Holy Spirit. Why did I help that person? I'm busy and I'm grumpy, why did I help that guy? Where did that come from? And that's the Holy Spirit kind of working in you the change that was supposed to happen from the beginning.
Gotcha.
We've
only got a couple minutes left, so I want to make sure. Any other questions?
So
I don't think Kathy and Renee have any.
Yeah.
Because they're debating about something already.
Yeah.
So I'll ask the one last question related to that then. Is how then did Catholicism end up developing such a sense of guilt, for Catholics? And all the laws. I mean, it dictated holy days of obligation. There's so much that's very formulaic. You have to do confession, for this, this, and this. How did that all come about?
Yeah.
If the way and grace
Mhm.
it plays out, or is that part of the schism between Lutheranism and Catholicism?
It's part of the schism. It's part of the schism is the short answer. I would say there are two types of people in the world. There are the people who just want to be told the things to do. Just tell me the things.
Mhm.
Um, uh, and for that person, the holy day of obligation stuff works pretty well. Actually, it's like, okay, I go to church, go to mass here, go to confession then.
So they need
You know,
law, they need rules because they have to have a checklist.
yeah, right. And there's that checklist mentality, and I have objections to the checklist mentality. But for a lot, I think for some people, it works pretty well for them.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, you don't have to think about it then.
well, right. You don't have to think about it, or the thinking's easier. There's a second type of person, which is very much what Luther is, and all the checklist does is, and this has always been the basic Lutheran. So I think the Catholic Church would say we're playing to the larger audience. Their bet is most people are like person one. They just want the checklist, and we're
Mhm.
playing to that audience. And the Lutheran objection to that has been, yeah, but if you think about it, if anybody thinks about it harder than 2 seconds, Luther, this is always Luther's basic objection. It drives the simple Christian to despair, is what he would always say. Is that by doing it that way, what you're doing is you're doing it. Luther's biggest problem was always, when do I know I've done enough? Right. There's this big line. This people still say this line a lot. Uh, the saying, I forget what it was in Latin, but translated, it's God, do your best, God forgives the rest. Is
Mhm.
but Luther's big problem was always, when do I know I've done my best? And this drove him mad. Like, he was confessing every little thing.
Yeah, to the point where haven't you said his
Yeah,
confessor was
his
told him, chill out, dude?
his confessor literally kicked him out of the confessional booth and said, "Come back when you've actually sinned." you know, and so, um, uh, but he was trying. His thinking went. I think most people hear, "Try your best, God forgives the rest," and they think, or not most. I think a lot of people hear that and they say, "Oh, okay, that's fair enough." But there's a lot of people who also hear that, "Try your best, God forgives the rest," and they're driven mad by the idea of, when do I know I've done my best?
Yeah.
What is my best? Like, I can never reach that point. And that's where the kind of Lutheran instinct of like, no, it doesn't work that way, because it's not about your best; it's about you at your worst, actually, and how God forgives you at your worst, and still moves you to do those things anyway.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a type of person. It's a personality thing as much as anything else. I think.
That fits.
Okay,
And we can't explore it anymore because
we're out of time.
we're out of time.
All right.
Thank you for
Thank you.
rejoining.
Yep. Thank you, folks.
Yeah. Thank you for checking it out. Hope you enjoyed it. Yeah.
Mm, all right.
Cool.
See you, folks.
Yeah, seriously. Thanks for sticking.